Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.05, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about our first creation challenge here in section number 5, synthesis, synth processing, and creation. One thing I didn't mention, it might have been obvious to some of you, but maybe not to all, is that when I have the E kick in an instrument track and I'm working with velocities, velocity is typically going to be tied and linked to either drum pads or keys you have on a MIDI keyboard. Now, I didn't have my MIDI keyboard or, my pads hooked up, so I went into the actual clip itself and was messing around with the different velocities. When you record in, assuming you have a velocity sensitive keyboard, which your computer keyboard isn't going to be, but assuming you have maybe one of those MIDI controllers, it will record in that data as well. Okay, so even if you're just hitting notes, you can adjust how hard you're slamming the key, and that will impact this velocity sensitivity into whatever you've decided to map that to, whether it's an effect inside or its parameters on the E-kick itself. Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to explain. The other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly again is the process over product here. In my opinion, and this is where I think our course is very different from others, is that I'm really not focused on product when I sit down to start working on something, unless that's the job, unless that's the task at hand. So for example, if you are ghost producing for somebody and the label calls you and they say, we have this guy, we're going to push him, he needs some tracks. He obviously is incapable of making them himself, so do you mind helping us out and maybe making some stuff? And you say, okay, sure. What sort of sound is he going for? And maybe the artist himself or herself will contact you and say, this is what I'm going for. This is the sort of sound. They might send you some reference tracks of things they like. Usually the label is probably going to have more ideas than the artist at the time. Or I don't know if you call them the artist, just kind of the puppet. And so, you might go through and make something for them. In that case, you know what? You have to really be worried about the product. You have to fit it into that genre. And in those scenarios and situations as well, if they send you something and you're listening to it, and assuming you've gone through and demoed a bunch of different synthesizers, which I do encourage you do, you might hear that on that track, it really sounds like they're using Silent or Spire all over the place. And it's a good way to actually accumulate different plugins into your collection, because if you contact the label and say, look, it's obvious that they're using X, Y, and Z plugin, I don't have access to that, can you help me out? A lot of times they will help you out with that, or they'll send you somewhere where you can have access to it. But I don't know why I'm going on that tangent right now. My point is, there are situations where you do have to succumb to product over process, and you have deadlines, and you have to get something to sound a certain way. Now, that's not the focus of this course at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The point of this entire course is to enjoy the journey. It's to enjoy the process of making music and not get yourself so bogged down and focused on what that end product and result is. I give people, anybody who can sit down and put something out and say, this is my composition start to finish, I give you a ton of credit. I don't care if you're trying to fit it into a specific genre or not. The fact that you've sat there and you've made the decision that you're going to create something and you've done it, that speaks volumes. And you'd be shocked as to the number of people who will have Bitwig, who will open it up, and who will never come out with anything. It's actually probably greater than like 75% of the people using the program. All right, so our focus, our emphasis a lot of times in this course is based around creation. We're all good sound designers. We all can turn knobs. We all can come up with interesting results. So why can't we make our own creations? And what's holding us back from doing that? A lot of times it's just that idea of product, of coming up with something that you're comparing to others and saying, oh man, this sucks compared to so-and-so. And that's just your opinion. And I want you guys to know that just the more you practice, probably the happier you are going to be with your results. And when you don't have to focus on the results, the happier you can be making this. And the more you're going to get into it, and the more you're going to want to work at it. And that goes to just my one other point, and then I'm going to give you guys the instructions, which by now should be self-evident, and probably a lot of you have already read the description and closed the video. And that's just the way that you learn these devices. And I've talked about it with the other devices as well. And If your focus again is on product, is on final result, you're going to be constrained and you're going to be limited in the way that you decide to use the e-kick. You're going to use it to make your kick drum. You might also layer an acoustic kick drum on top and you're like, damn, I got a banging kick drum right here. Totally fine. And then you move on to the snare and you use the polysynth and you use these things. You know what? That's totally cool. That's totally fine. But in my opinion, you're never going to tap in to the full potential of these instruments. And so I was lucky enough to learn in such a way where I was told basically that. And originally I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That's stupid. Why am I going to use this for other purposes? But the reason you're going to do that is because you're going to come across some things you never thought you would have before. And I think there's also a big part of making music, at least for me, the selfish part, which is taking something like the e-kick and using it to create a soundscape. And at the end of that being like, damn, that thing was supposedly only good at making kick drums, and look what I was able to make it do. All right, and that is basically the crux of this creation project. Very simple. You have access to the e-kick, you have access to all the audio effects, you have access to bouncing, you have access to the effect tracks. If I can create one. Oh, they're just not showing up. There we go. And what I want you to do is create an original composition with the e-kick as your generator. Basically, this e-kick, the generation, the pitch modulation, the velocity sensitivity, these are replacing the samples that we've been working with before. All right. And if you find yourself feeling like that's too many choices, what I'd recommend you do is go through your audio effects and maybe also through the containers and just limit yourself. Say, okay, I'm only going to use the FX layer. That's the only container I'm willing to use. And I'm only going to use the EQ2, maybe the distortion, maybe a delay. And, you know, go back to that list we created before of the different categories of effects and just pull maybe one or pull maybe two out of that. Okay, and see what you can come up with. And that's the basis of the project. There's really nothing else to it. And we're going to see what we're able to do with this thing. And chances are in my composition, we're not going to be hearing any kick drums at all. Okay, so that's what I want you guys to do. Just remember that you can, for example, have an effect track. And this is just going to be my one little example for you. When I show you guys what I actually do with the track, I might explain some other things that I've done. But you can, for example, pull up a reverb here. Let's just grab a preset right now, something big. I always go to, where's that? Falling Hall. I like that one. If I have my kick drum, and I decide to send all the way to the reverb, I can solo out the reverb. I can create an audio track, and I should be able to take this from S1 reverb. I can go in here. Okay, I can go back, delete that, solo this out, take a quick listen to it. Okay, and maybe I just want this section at the end here. Okay, we're getting a little click at the beginning. I can go in here to the gain. I might make a more interesting envelope in the actual context, but for now. Okay, I'd probably also want to fade that out. And then if I wanted, I could add a tool device here just to turn things up quickly. All right, now what's to stop me from going in here and taking the pitch and maybe bringing that way up too? That doesn't sound too good. We'll try Stretch HD. Okay, and then what's to stop me from going in here and sending this back into the reverb? and then I could go through and I could resample that tail and I could do some more things with it if I wanted to. That's just one really basic example, and I wanted to show that to you so you can realize that you can work with audio clips again as long as you're using the kick as the source. Okay, so there's a lot of potential here. It might get overwhelming at some point, so when that happens, just try to strip it back again. And I really look forward to hearing what you guys are able to come up with. I'm super stoked for this, and it's going to be lots of fun. So until the next video, take care.